see if we can get a Twitch channel online. There's always a little bit of a delay, so I'm always wanting to make sure that it's actually going properly uh, before we start doing our thing. Even though probably that means that at this point, this part that we're right now is you know it's doing they're going to be the beginning. There we go. Okay, good. I had to refresh, but we're streaming. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike McTeen.
and tonight we're continuing our show, even though last time we finished the AFI's Top 100 Movies list. Crazy, right?
Yep.
So, uh, even though we finished the AFI's Top 100 Movies list, as we discussed at the end of our last episode, our intention is to keep talking about good movies and then arbitrarily ranking them on lists as we feel like it. And so tonight, we're talking about two movies that we each suggested one, and so we're going to be talking about Gladiator and Groundhog Day. So, uh, unless you have any other general comments, we could go ahead and get started. Want to start with Groundhog Gladiator is what I was trying to say, and then it could be either one. Which do you want to start with?
It's fine to start with Groundhog Day.
Either way, we can do Groundhog Day first. Sure, why not? We're doing Groundhog Day first. If I can make this, there we go. All right, Groundhog Day. It's Groundhog Day again. So this was my suggestion for this week, and I picked it because not only is it emblematic and kind of archetypal as far as a subgenre of movies, those being time loop movies, which don't have to be movies, obviously, could be any kind of story, could be like a book or a TV show or whatever. But it's also just an amazing movie, I think, that's funny, but also deeper than you might expect initially. So if you're only watching it on a superficial level. So that's why I chose it. And so now let's talk about it.
All right.
So,
Ready.
yeah. So, for anyone who has not seen Groundhog Day, you should. But the basic premise, of course, is that we have Bill Murray playing Phil Connors, who is a weatherman who, just out of tradition, has always been sent down to cover the Groundhog Day festival in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania. And he hates it because he's a cynical guy who just doesn't really get much out of anything, it seems like. He's kind of just snarky all the time. He's not very nice. But he is traveling there with his cameraman, played by Chris Elliott, and his producer, played by Andy McDowell. But once he gets there, he discovers that he has now been trapped inside a time loop where he keeps repeating Groundhog Day, February 2nd, over and over, and has to figure out how he can escape, and ends up doing it by becoming a better person, and that's the story. So I actually watch this movie, rewatch it pretty regularly. Has it been a while since you had seen it, or?
It had probably been less time than like the normal gaps between the times I watched this movie. I had watched it, I don't know, maybe a year ago or something like that. Usually I don't watch it once a year. So
Yeah. Well, I don't watch it like once a year. I don't like do it on Groundhog Day or anything like that. It's not ritualized in any way, but it's just one of my favorites, and it's very easy to rewatch. Like it's just an easy viewing experience. Doesn't require a whole lot of emotional preparation or anything like that. It's just you know, uh, it I've seen it enough times that it's like the part of the movie where he knows everything and he's kind of just comfortable with it, and it's just like, what does he feel like getting up to today? Well, he knows all the different things that are going to be happening all over town, so he can just say, well, maybe today I'll go over and do this thing, and it's all just comfortable and familiar and nice, which is the period towards the end of the movie where he's more at peace with everything. But I feel like, in addition to just being funny, which it is, I feel like the ideas in there, the themes of what it means for him to be a better person, to escape the loop, like the process that he goes through to it, and ultimately what is successful for him, I think is really interesting and a lot deeper than it could have been. Because, in particular, what we have, we could imagine a version of this movie where all he has to do is just start being nice to everybody, right? But,
Right.
and that would be like, to some extent, let's compare this movie briefly to Scrooged, which I also love, and this is not a criticism of Scrooged, but partly because Scrooged is following the template of, A Christmas Carol. Like, it doesn't take much, ultimately, his character in that movie, like, he sees what the different ghosts have to tell him, but ultimately, like, what's the end result is that he just like, oh no, I get it now. Actually, everything I used to believe in is wrong, and now I believe different things. And all of those, it's like there's a little bit more of a light switch type transformation in that movie, whereas in this one, we see him go through the whole process of, like the 5 stages of grief, and then I really like, because in some ways it could be seen that getting the girl is like the prize, right? But ultimately, like, that's sort of the act 2 finish in this, is him really realizing that's never gonna work. Like, what he's been trying to do is doomed to failure, and it's just representative of his whole thing being stuck in the time loop to begin with.
Right.
So I think that this movie, I mean, so do you want to say? I could keep going on about it, but, like, do you have thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, I think one of the things that always impresses me when I do watch it is that the humor is much more clever than you kind of expect it to be.
Mm-hmm.
It because the premise is so over the top, like, you expect it to be very screwball. I guess I just always, even though I know the movie, I think that's always what I'm expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since some of the more memorable humor parts are part of kind of the over the top stuff at the beginning, when he's sort of first figuring out that he can do anything he wants, and he's kind of in that whole, like, debase, like, oh, I can just punch this guy in the face, like, I can do this, yeah. That part is a little screwball and slapstick,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't last very long.
Right. Yeah.
It gets much more clever very quickly as he transitions to robbing the bank, and it's just like things that you wouldn't think of, and the fact that they wrote this in such a clever way of, like, really thinking through, like, if you could do anything,
Mm-hmm.
if you had enough knowledge, like, what are some of the things you would do? And and it's a nice, like you said, the transition in it through the steps of grief, because isn't there, like, a period where he essentially tries to kill himself?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a whole,
Yeah,
like, montage of them.
right, the montage of that, and so that's there's that kind of dark piece, and then to your point, that's when he starts to come out of it, and it's like, well, I've accepted it now. Now what can I do? And then that's where you get really some of the really clever jokes,
Mm-hmm.
and as he's really indulging in this without being, like, totally debased anymore. He's being more clever, and you come along
Right.
and you're like, oh man, I would have never thought to do that, and it's just a fun journey to come along. And then to your point, the way that he gets the girl in, it kind of he starts in his old way where he basically uses the tricks
Yeah, yeah.
of the situation to win.
Right. It's essentially a deception, right?
Right.
Like he's trying to find, what's the secret combo that produces the ideal outcome.
Right. And so that's where it's a nice, clever tie back, almost like even though they don't relate it to the robbing of the bank, it is
Hmm.
essentially the same process for him.
Yeah.
And that he goes about it the same way he went about robbing the bank, which is not and again, like in a simpler movie, that could have even been the ending. Like somebody would have thought that was funny,
Hmm.
and it would have been, I mean, that would have been a stupid way for it to end, but you could see a movie end that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I agree. Is my point is that, it's you because the premise is silly, you expect it to be silly. It has
Hmm.
some silly parts, but it's much more clever in its humor, not just in its structure. Like you said, obviously the package of the movie is much deeper than you expect, but even just the funnier parts are more clever than I always expect.
Right. I think one of the reasons for that is that although it's certainly high concept in the sense of, this idea, this fantastical thing that's happening, this time loop, like there's no effects for it, right? Like they don't depict anything fantastic. He just keeps waking up on the same day, but nothing we actually see on screen is fantastical, right? We don't see some magical little elf waving a magic wand to do it to him or anything like that. And so everything we actually see on screen is really just character based, right? All of the humor is organic to the characters and who they are. And that comes from not only Phil on his journey, but also lots of humor just coming from all of the other incidental characters who pretty much, I think, to a person other than Phil himself, are like nice, which is, of course, by design, right? Because he's supposed to be the mean one that doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
to your point about effects, like even just whatever the sequence when he wakes up, the metronome of kind of this is a new day is
mhm,
super effective.
yeah. Starting
So
the
simple.
song in the middle, but at the same place every time, and it just becomes this, put your little hand in mine.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a song that everybody knows. It's
Hmm.
just it's a and then yeah, just the way that whole piece happens. It's you always recognize, and it's what makes it so effective on the day that he comes out of it. It's like
Yeah.
abrupt for us as well as it is for him.
Right.
And
Well,
you don't know that's going to happen.
but it's such a neat little, like, nuanced callback where, like, when he wakes up the first time, like the first loop, like his first repeat, he is talking to himself like about the radio show, and he's like, "Come on, guys, you're playing yesterday's tape." Um, but then at the end, like on the day when he finally gets to February 3rd, it still plays the same song, but it does start it at a different spot. It's still in the middle of the song, but not the same point, which
Right.
is just a little bit of this start of like, oh, well, like also if you hadn't, paid attention to the fact you're almost at the end of the movie, and it's like, it's just, but from it's an early sign that doesn't confirm, but it's a little different. And then you start hearing it's like, oh no, hey, we're playing the song from yesterday, and then you see Rita's arm, right? And so you're like, oh, and so it's fun the way it just takes a little time to let that build, but
Right.
as he realizes what has happened.
Yes. So yeah, but they spent a lot of care in things that in a lesser movie wouldn't have mattered,
Hmm.
and that is one of the things that is part of a joy of rewatching this movie. So
Yeah, yeah,
this is man, he just really worked really hard at this for a comedy, and I respect that.
hmm hmm Well, Bill Murray, of course, is a great choice for the role. According to the IMDb trivia, there was some original discussion of having Tom Hanks in the role, but eventually deciding that he's too nice. And I tend to think, like, Tom Hanks is great. I think he could have been great, but Bill Murray is just, like, he makes it his own. Like, whatever the role would have been before they cast Bill Murray, now it's hard to imagine anyone else doing it quite the same way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think I see what they're saying about Tom Hanks, and I think what
mhm.
he does better. He in more of a subtle character transformation from like I mean I guess it's not subtle how he goes about it, but like Castaway, he's
Mhm.
not a bad guy at the beginning, but he's obsessed with his job and his
Right.
BlackBerry and all that kind of stuff, and then at the end he's just much more laid back. It's not a internal like who he is as a core shift. It's more of a his behaviors and habits and his outward look on the world has
Mhm.
changed, and so the change in him is more subtle, even if it was a very dramatic way to get there.
Right. Right. Um,
Whereas this you have to go through a little bit more. Bill Murray is very good at playing both a asshole that we don't hate, and also a good guy
mhm.
because he's kind of he sort of is in that sweet spot of that. So
Right.
he's
Like, he's got a charm to him, even as we chuckle to ourselves about what a rascal he is, at the beginning, right? Like, there are a few points where he kind of goes over the line a little bit and gets chastised for it, but like, at the same time, he is of a level where, like, he does not care about anyone else's opinion anyway, right? So even though there's like a few times where Rita will kind of like scowl at him about whatever it is, and but for the most part, what we have, one thread that I enjoy in the movie, when you're paying attention to it, is the just the thread of Rita and shoot, what was Chris Elliott's camera guy's name? I forget the character's name. Um, it was Larry.
Larry.
And yeah, and just the relationship of the two of them bonding together over them having to deal with Phil, right? Like, just this ongoing exchanges of looks, and just like, yep, we know what we're in for here. Just lots of just little exchanges after he leaves the scene or whatever. And I think that that's kind of a fun thread that they clearly put some thought into that dynamic as well, rather than having it just be, anytime Bill Murray leaves the screen, we leave with him. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Um, but one of the things, though, that I think has made
You
this.
just want to before because I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but just since you did mention you just used his name, like even just the fact that they call him Phil, like it, his name in the movie is Phil, and the groundhog is named Phil, like
Yeah, yeah.
funny.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. No, I wasn't. I thought you were going somewhere else with that. Okay, yeah,
No,
but
no, no, it's just a subtle little thing that they did that
yeah.
it was unnecessary, but it just
Mhm.
adds a little bit of texture to it.
Yeah, you can just imagine that being like how he got assigned to do it the first time or something like that. It's like, hey, Phil, like the groundhog, ha ha. Yeah, and you
Which would
can
of
just
course piss him off even more about having to do it. Yeah.
yeah, and of course, and so it's just this, and you can just imagine how many times he has heard people make that joke, even before the time loop starts.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, it was something that again you didn't it because it was irrelevant what his name was.
Mm-hmm.
So to name him after the groundhog is just I don't know. Like I said, it's a small thing, but just one of those where you're like, man, there's a lot of care that went into this.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. Rocket, stop chewing up stuff. Anyway, yeah, I think one of the reasons, though, that time loop movies just in general have this appeal, because, like, there's a whole bunch of them, right? And I feel like actually I wouldn't mind having, once we are ready to finish this particular one, just a quick sort of discussion of some other good time loop stories. But I I think one of the things that is so appealing about them in general as like a concept is a that we can all kind of relate to a feeling of being in a little bit of a rut where it feels like every day is the same, right? And having that just be that the rote routine of drudgery of every day's the same, right? Like they hang a light on that in this movie where Phil's talking about that at the bar in the context of being in the time loop, but one of the other drunks at the bar is just like, yeah, that about sums it up for me. But then that is paired with this hedonistic impulse of the no consequences, you could do whatever you want, right? And then there's also just this element of, for people who grew up playing video games, there's a very video gamey sort of element to it, right? This idea that you can play the same thing over and over again and get to know certain levels really well. Like, that's the whole concept with like the Dark Souls games, is this idea that you become so familiar with the certain set of controls and a certain layout of a level and certain enemy types that you just know exactly what to do. You can master it. And so I think all of those things can kind of play in to what is fun just about the concept of a time loop.
Right.
But for how one of the things that's always a little different in the different time loops is what exactly is it, like, whether or not they deal with why is it happening. It's frequently left kind of hand wavy, right? Because that's ultimately often not what the story is really about. We don't care, like I said, we don't see a little elf wave a magic wand to put him in a time loop. So instead, it's just about, finding it within himself to break himself out of his own cycle, which is exactly where it ties back again to this feeling that people can have of being in a rut. But if you're ever going to get out of it, you need to find that within yourself. And for him to kind of go through this whole process of, at first, like I said, you can really see the 5 stages of grief mapped on there really, in a straightforward way. Because of course, first there's denial in just the sense that like this doesn't make any sense. How could this be? I don't believe it. I keep trying to prove it somehow that it's not happening, right? Incidentally, one of the other things that's in the trivia is that the original screenplay started with him already in the loop, so that like the idea would be, isn't it strange? How does he know everything that's going to happen, and have it be introduced to the audience like that? Like it's this mystery of, we find out. But I think the big problem with that ultimately is it deprives us of getting to watch him react to finding it out. So, it really separates us from him as a character if we don't get to go through that part of it with him, I think. But so, and then there's anger, where he the denial starts fading into that, and that's where he's like he starts to like to act out. He goes and yells at different people, yells at the psychiatrist, or no, I guess the neurologist played by Harold Ramis, and then starts just doing whatever he wants, because that's really acting out of anger too, right? Is the element of drive the police car around, like, because it's fun, but it's expressed in a destructive way, right? And then of course bargaining, and that's where he starts feeling like, okay, well, if I'm going to be stuck here, then I'm at least going to figure out how to make it work for me, and take advantage of it. But then that stops working, and he gets into the depression, and that's where he starts trying to commit suicide, and then but eventually he gets past that, and he starts finding like actual inner peace. He discovers that the way to reach that sort of um, enlightenment is by accepting the place, the people and the places around him, getting to know them in a real and deep way, learning some patience about it, and then just getting to a point where he is okay with being in the loop, and that's ultimately kind of what seems to unlock everything at the end. I just feel like there's, without it mapping specifically to any particular real world situation, I feel like there's some really good, like, philosophy and psychology lessons in there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Just because, like you said, they went through the trouble of taking him through the journey that you would normally go through. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so that's what makes it applicable, even though the situation isn't. Is While that directly isn't what is going to happen to you, it is those feelings that is how you get out the other side.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of go through that progression, and that's you know where it's good. So
Right. Yeah. So it's like no one relates to these because they're literally stuck in a time loop, but the feelings he has past the supernatural element of it are definitely feelings we everybody can relate to. Kind of feeling stuck somewhere, feeling like, you know, dissatisfied with what's around you. Um, I think that there's an element to which, like, I have, you know, I don't want to say recently, but increasingly as I've gotten older, I have an increased amount of skepticism for movies about the person from the big city who rediscovers how nice it is to be in a small town. Like that whole thing, which is so tropey, just because I don't think small towns are automatically bad, of course, but I think that there is also like the tropey elements of those stories, like the cliches of them, are always that, oh well, people in the city are mean and in a hurry and everything, whereas people in the small town are like friendly and nice and in touch with nature or something, and that sort of thing, which I think, you know, is very much a stereotype and uh, unhelpful. I think in a lot of respects. I think a lot of those stories are not. Um, I'm not sure they come from a good place. They tend to be more about escapism, and nostalgia, right? Because nostalgia is not inherently bad, but what it can come from though is a desire to escape whatever it is that your current problems are, right? And so, why do people tell those stories of the jaded big city dweller rediscovering themselves in a small town? Is because, like, it forces that character to be separated from the things that are causing them their current troubles,
right.
and then it's this fantasy escapism of like, oh, and isn't it better there because it doesn't have all of these other problems, even though in real life it would have its own problems. Like, how many of those big city dwellers who find new lives these tiny out of the way towns stick around 8 months later when they realize they can't get Indian food delivered? It's like, um, I don't know. I feel like I'm venturing really far afield here, but like there's elements of that here, right?
Yeah.
Where he's coming from the city and he kind of comes to appreciate this small town. They kind of talk about moving there at the end, but I feel like that's not a serious suggestion. Um,
No.
yeah, he kind of jokes about it, but you know, it's been made clear, first of all, that, like, even if he is now feeling more at home there, especially given all the time spent, it seems unlikely that she would just be like, oh, sure, I'll just set aside my career as a producer for a network, hoping to move on to bigger and better things so that I can go live in a small town with someone who was a weatherman and now is going to do what? But at the same time, I don't think that the movie expects us to take that seriously necessarily. Um, Gosh, I'm just rambling. I'm all over the place. Say something else.
I said what I need to say about the movie, so I just didn't want to interrupt you and stop you. But
Okay. You don't have anything else? That's fine. I
I
mean,
mean,
I
felt like I covered what I had
sure.
kind of written down in my
That's
notes,
all right.
and
Well, I feel like I want to shout out some of the other smaller roles that are lots of fun
yeah,
and
let's do
so
that.
iconic. Like we got, of course, got Stephen Tobolowsky as Ned, Ned the Head. Uh, Bing, that guy is just all of these characters just so like iconic.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and well, I guess then I will go back to kind of weave into my point of like how clever it is. Like,
hmm
what a great it's not his first interaction. What a great early interaction
hmm
during the day to just be this guy who's so annoying to the current, if you're starting at the beginning of the movie, the current Phil.
hmm
Everything about this Ned character is exactly all the stuff that he hates.
hmm
Like he's just trying to be friendly with no like he's goofy and all and happy and friendly and all these things, and so he does such a great job of like helping us like launch into every day,
hmm
especially at the beginning, and then of course obviously they can phase him out a little bit at the end as he starts to do more things during the rest of the day, but he's just a good kickstart
Right.
um, to everything, because that he's going to come in over the top, so he leads really well into the like punching him in the face or like doing these different things. Like he's a great experiment for the early parts of the thing, and
Exactly. Yeah.
the actor's so good at being that character.
Yeah. Yeah. This guy that is simultaneously not really doing anything that wrong, right? Like he certainly comes on very strong and he's not reading Phil's body language very well, right? Like he could have some boundary issues, but what he's really doing for the most part is just being aggressively friendly, right?
Right.
But it's so illustrative of who Phil is at the beginning, where this is someone who if I think if we're assuming here that Ned is not lying about going to high school with them, then this is someone that in theory Phil should remember or at least had the potential to remember, but he's just not the sort of person who um, would remember a person that he hasn't thought about since high school, probably didn't notice much at the time.
Right.
And then to have that be sort of a token of how he changes, which is to start noticing the people around him and getting to know them and what they like and what they want and all that. And so, of course, the amount of life insurance he buys from Ned could also theoretically be a problem once time starts up again. But but then we
Well, like
also
he doesn't necessarily do it on his last day, does he?
he does, because that's one of
He
the
does.
things that Ned says at the party is like, "Oh, this guy, he bought this and this and this and this from me." Yeah.
That's right. You're right. You're right. Yep. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He will have that then when he wakes up.
Yeah. It sounds like it anyway. But then one of the other, of course, repeat encounters that we have is um, the homeless guy that he can't seem to save. And I think that that is such an interesting thread. Like, it's only a pretty small part of the movie. But for a comedy, to have a bit where what it is like, even with all of this power that he has for the time loop, he can't save this guy's life. And it's this element where it humbles him even from his overwhelming sense of power. This like, oh, like I'm like a god, not the god, I don't think, he says. But it shows him that like even with this perfect knowledge of everything, he can't seem to fix that. and it's just an interesting, like, sometimes you talk about, like, in a recipe, like you're making a cake, you put a little bit of salt in there because it makes the flavor more complex, everything. And so in that same way, you have something that's genuinely not funny. It's actually sad, and it's not played for laughs in the movie, right? That he can't save this guy. But I think it's part of him becoming more humble to get to where he needs to be ultimately, right? The only other two secondary characters that I also wanted to just shout out a little bit is that we have the Mayor Buster, who is played by Brian Doyle Murray, who is actually Bill Murray's brother. And for the longest time, I had no idea about that. Like, I figured that out like only just 2 years ago or something like that.
I figured it out like 2 minutes ago when you just said it.
Oh, well, there you go. So now everybody knows that. But I feel like, I don't know, that would that always comes to mind for me because I, when someone told me they were brothers, I was like, "What were you talking about? Like, I don't believe it." And then they're like, "What are you talking about? They look exactly the same." And I just, I am just dumbfounded by that because I guess, like, you can kind of maybe see it around the eyes or something, but, like, I don't know. It just, I don't have a lot to say about that necessarily, except that it makes me have anxiety about my own ability to recognize faces. Um, but the other secondary small role in this movie that I only just learned about on this viewing is that the young couple that the girl was getting cold feet, but then eventually he talks them into getting married after all, and he gives them WrestleMania tickets and all of that. That apparently the husband of that couple is played by Michael Shannon, who is currently, the big actor Michael Shannon, and I think that's kind of amazing because I really like Michael Shannon. I did not even recognize him. I just saw his name in the credits, and I'm like, wait, who did he play? I looked it up, but I think that's just fun to think about. But yeah, so just I feel like this movie is like there's like every time loop movie references this one now, right? Like, it's not necessarily the first story to ever have this idea. There have certainly been several since then, but it's become this whole sort of a shorthand thing of, like, anytime any other, like, TV show or movie or whatever is going to do a time loop, it's like, what is it? What's happening? Oh, it's like Groundhog Day. It's become this archetypal example of what's going on like that. But I also did, in thinking about it, just want to talk a little bit about other time loop movies because it's a favorite subgenre of mine.
Okay.
So of the other ones that come immediately to mind, of course, we get Edge of Tomorrow, which is the Tom Cruise science fiction action movie one, which, obviously is a very different kind of movie. It does a very different thing with
Yep.
the idea. But then you also have the relatively recent Russian Doll Netflix series,
Yep.
which I highly recommend that one if anyone hasn't checked that out. It's actually a little bit different than this. Like, it's sort of a time loop, but it handles it a little differently because it's the loop is not based on the day; it's based on the character dying. And when she dies, she resets back to the same period. But also, things don't stay the same; like, they keep changing, and she notices.
Right.
And so there's some really interesting stuff there. But then I'll also just there's the very recent Palm Springs. Did you watch that one?
No.
That one has got Andy Samberg and shoot, what was the actress's name? Kristen Milotti. And another, basically, in that one they literally mention because when the actress gets in the time loop in there, she has met Andy Samberg's character who was already in it, and so when he's explaining to her what has happened now that she has joined him in the time loop, is he basically says, "Oh, it's like Groundhog Day." But that one's really good too. People should check that out if you haven't on Hulu. And then also there's the Happy Death Day slasher movies. There's Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You. And I'm just going to go ahead and say those are really good movies. They're actually really good, and not just like good for a slasher movie. I think that people should watch them. My only hesitation at all in recommending those movies is that I don't like the baby mask that the killer wears. I don't I find it unpleasant to look at, and I wish they had done something else. But I mean, I guess part of the idea is that it's supposed to be unsettling to look at, but I just feel like I would rather look at something else unsettling, not that one. But the thing about those movies that I think a lot of people might not, be aware of if you avoided those movies was, like even if you're someone who just generally doesn't watch horror movies or slasher movies in general, first of all, I would say that as slasher movies go, like the violence is very tame in them. There's not a lot of gore or anything like that. But also that, just this idea that she keeps getting killed and then resetting back to the same day. But very much like in Groundhog Day, the cleverness of what she starts doing to try to take advantage of being in this loop is just extremely well written. And both movies are actually very good. I think people should watch them.
I agree. I was going to just do my top three, and that series I made is one of my top three. Run Lola Run.
Oh yeah, there you go.
That's probably one of my top three.
Mm.
And this one's a little bit of a stretch, but I still think it works. But the movie Looper.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Because ultimately, the way that what the whole premise of the conflict is that they ultimately eventually have to kill their own future or future self.
Mm-hmm.
And so that closes the loop. But there's that time loop of like trying to avoid being put into the spit position where you're going to kill yourself, and then you're using your time ability to evade people. So it's part time hop, but also part time loop.
Right.
So like I said, it's a little bit of a stretch, but
I mean, I think that in general, like obviously,
but I like it. So.
I think it's a great movie too. I agree, and I agree that it's like structured differently than a lot of these other examples, but certainly I think the concept is there. And
I guess technically Run Lola Run is structured differently too, because she is given at the beginning, she is told that she's in the time loop.
Mm-hmm.
Like she knows she has 3 times like to run.
Yeah.
So it's different. It's a little different in the fact the character is aware from the beginning that the time loop is going to occur.
It's interesting because I'm just realizing how long it's been a while since I saw that movie, and I genuinely don't remember how it begins now.
I mean, short story is she basically has to pay off some kind of mob sort of thing.
Right. Well,
she has to collect 100,000 Deutschmarks by the end of the day, but she gets three tries to do it. I don't remember exactly all the mechanisms. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen it too, but I know every time I watch it, I really enjoy it. So.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm just realizing I don't remember the details of it because it always felt very, like so many of these, the actual mechanism for why the repeats are happening is very undefined by design, right? Because it's not really the point. As I recall, part of what she's trying to fix is that her boyfriend was supposed to be making this big drop off of something either very valuable or cash itself, but right. Then he left it on the bus or something like that. There was just some simple mix up that meant that he didn't have the money and was he was gonna get killed as a result, or like he was going to try to rob a grocery store or something to get the money instead. Like I don't even remember now, but I should rewatch that movie.
On her, which allows us to kind of sort of by proxy root for her as a hero.
Yeah.
because she's not the one who actually got into trouble and has to owe the money.
Mm-hmm.
She's trying to save somebody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, I don't remember exactly how they
Mm-hmm.
trigger this idea, but the idea is that she's got 3 runs. That's very video gamey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you get 3 tries, you got to collect this much,
Mm-hmm.
and it just starts with the same sequence of her waking up, running down the stairs, running out into the thing, and trying to figure out how to get the money.
Yeah. And one of the most memorable bits of that movie for me is something that sounds so just ridiculous out of context, but I feel like it really works in the movie, which is the point near the climax where she just literally screams at, I think it's some dice or like a roulette wheel or something like that. She just like literally screams to make it
And like
land
forces it
on,
where she
yeah, to
wants.
make it win. And it's just one of those things where it, like, the tone of that movie is such that it allows something like that to um, feel like earned and meaningful, and not just like, well, shoot, how do we get the money? Well, okay.
So,
But yeah, no, those are good examples too. I had forgotten all about Run Lola Run. But then, of course, there's also been lots of TV shows that do episodes where there's a time loop and that sort of thing. I think it's such an evocative concept to tell stories in, for the reasons that we've talked about. But Groundhog Day is the one that kind of started it all there, at least in terms of the highest profile example of this type of story, to the point where it's the iconic one. All right.
yep.
So let's then
Yep. Go
move
ahead. I'm going to throw
on.
this while you kind of switch.
Okay. So now that we've talked about Groundhog Day, let's talk about Gladiator. Gladiator was a movie from the year 2000, starring, of course, Russell Crowe, Joaquin Phoenix, Connie Nielsen, and a variety of other fantastic character actors. Um, and I This is a movie that like I struggled to kind of remember, like,
I'm
how
shutting,
was what?
I'm shutting my blinds. Keep going.
Okay. I was actually kind of struggling to remember before actually looking things up, of like, what was the reception for this movie at the time? Because I remember liking it, but I was like, couldn't remember for sure what had been the general consensus about it. And I think part of that was because it was actually mixed. Because of course we had, it won some Oscars and it got a lot of good things, but also, like, for example, Roger Ebert really didn't like it. Just as an example there. So, but it was your suggestion, so tell us about Gladiator.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I suggested it, if you weren't there, is that I was kind of looking. I wanted to look at movies on this list that were on there for sort of their genre capabilities, and see if I could think of another movie that we could compare it to that was more modern, and evaluate whether it belonged or didn't belong.
Oh yeah.
And so you look at Spartacus. It's kind of on there for 2 reasons. One, it is a sort of a gladiator Roman story, and it's a epic tale. Well, there's plenty of epic tales that are on that list now, and so it's more just on there for the gladiator time period, that part of Rome, sort of that idea of not just the gladiator fighting itself, but the idea that there was this slave uprising boiling below the surface of the empire that was kind of evoked through the gladiator fight. And this movie does a lot of that same things. It's he is obviously if you've seen the movie, which hopefully everyone has, it's very entertaining. And if you're not, are you not entertained? Um, he starts out as the top general. His the emperor is going to leave the empire to him and break the tradition of, basically break the monarchy up into a more true representative democracy, and he's the one who's going to lead them into it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The emperor's son is not like that, kills the emperor, and then kills his family, and basically he gets put into slavery, and that's the idea, is that now he's become equal to the slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And because he's such a great general just as a person, he's able to take that situation and mold it to his advantage and lead essentially, obviously the slaves don't uprise at the end, but you can see that he has now led the same thing that Spartacus was doing, which is lead by example from the lower tier and get everybody else riled up and realize that, like, hey, we don't have to listen to these guys anymore. So it's not an exact one for one, but the concept of like getting the people to recognize that they want this representative, they don't want a monarchy on them, they don't want an empire, like they want to be part of government, and doing it via the fighting and the gladiator arena, is why I chose it. And so I think it does an excellent job of that. I like that it's a bittersweet revenge story,
Mm.
And I like that I don't like that the revenge is because his family was killed.
Mm.
I like that that's his driving motivation. He's not in it to be the guy who gets the slaves and the populace to rise up. But he recognizes his agency in that,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a subtlety there that makes his character really strong. He's in it because his family was murdered, by the current emperor, and he's found a path there. By continuing to win, he eventually has to go to Rome, and then he can be there. And so, because revenge stories are very tricky, because it's not a happy thing to like I don't get excited about like getting revenge over things, but like this is one where it's like that one's so personal, where it's like you kind of get why he wants to do it.
Right.
And that's why I love that, to your point, like the salt in the cake of he also recognizes that he's bringing all these other people along with him that are getting something more out of it. And now he wants to kill the emperor, for more than just his family. He wants to do it for all these guys who fought with him and all of their families and all of the people who he's, have been cheering him on, and he realizes are the real Romans. And then sort of as he realizes that and becomes more galvanized in like his quest, like that's the fun part, is like watching him go from like, yeah, you get it, you want to watch the cool battles, you want to watch him get there because his family was killed, but then you realize, as he realizes, it's so much more than that. And then for him to, finally get his revenge and perish doing it, like there's that bittersweet, like, well, he gets to be with his family again. He got all these other people exactly what they needed. So he everything that he became bigger for, he accomplished. And the people that he originally wanted to do this for, he's going to be with. And it's like, but that's like a happy ending, even though he dies at the end. And of course there's the, extra little punch of, the only reason he dies at the end is because the other guy cheats.
Yeah.
Which just, there's even just more of this, like, galvanizes you as a fan to be like the honor of like what he did, and how dishonorable, what can I think of Joaquin Phoenix's character's name?
Commodus.
Commodus, yeah, how dishonorable Commodus is. And you just, you go out like, yeah, Maximus, yeah, like you become a fan, at least for me. I don't want to say everybody. I become a fan of his journey. I become a fan of his fights. I become a fan of it, not because I just want to watch him kick ass, because I love where he's going and what he's doing and why he's doing it. And that's why I really, really enjoy this movie, and why I feel like it had a place to be in the discussion for telling a story about this time period.
One of the things that struck me in rewatching it this time, which was the first time in a while, the politics of it felt to me simultaneously very pre 9/11, like late 90s, early 2000s, which makes sense because that's when it was made.
Hmm.
But then also like cr- crazy timely, in a way that made me a little uncomfortable, actually. Which I don't mean as a criticism of the movie, but just without to drag us too much into current politics. Like the premise, as you mentioned, is that like obviously a lot of this is fictionalized in terms of real Roman history, but the premise of the older emperor was that,
Well, and the older emperor is Marcus Aurelius, who is, you know,
well, yeah,
one
some of
of the
these are
most
real people.
revered emperors from his like from the timeliness standpoint. Like he's one of the original Stoics. Like he's his writings have persisted, so they latched on to that as well. Like somebody with
Yeah.
who we consider very honorable even at this time.
Right. Well, but a lot of the people who were real people in this story, like none of this actually happened this way.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
the fact that they attributed it to somebody that we already have that kind of
Yeah.
attribution to,
Hmm.
for again, if anybody's read Stoicism or Marcus Aurelius, like he has this like honorable, like high level, fan base basically already.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But what I was trying to get at is that it's presented in the movie as though Rome has a Senate that's supposed to be like elected by the people, and the implication at the beginning is that the emperor had kind of taken on additional powers, making them more powerful than the Senate. And the ostensible reason for that was that it was because of all these wars that happened, that were happening, that had to be fought, and so we got to give the emperor all these emergency powers. And that now that he was tired of wars, he was going to give the power back to the Senate, and that's what he wanted for Maximus was, don't be the emperor when I'm gone. What I want you to do is basically just supervise returning the power to the people and to the Senate, because I know I can trust you to do that. Right? Like that was the whole concept there. But
right.
then what of course happens is that when he tries to tell Commodus that that's going to happen, Commodus, the person who was going to be emperor before this plan came about, said, I'm not sure I like that. Um, I think that scene is actually really interesting. Like one of the scenes that I feel like out of context of actually watching the movie, one of the scenes that always kind of stood out to me the most was when Commodus is talking to his dad and he's saying how you're always talking about these different virtues, like the courage and loyalty and honor and all of that, but like there are other virtues that I have, like ambition and determination and these sorts of things, but none of mine were on your list, and that always just stood out to me. But of course he takes over, but the reason that kind of felt extra timely like today is because with again, without going too deep into current politics, the idea that we have someone who is making all of government be all about themselves and doing anything they can think of um, to try to further their own power, regardless of the impact it has on anybody else, that felt timely to me. And the idea that we need to sort of return the government to the people that should be in charge, instead of this guy who's just a megalomaniac. That it felt weird watching it now. So I don't know. Did you have any thoughts like that when you were watching it this time, or maybe you watch it regularly enough it didn't really strike you?
Yeah, I mean it came to my head. I mean, obviously that's a thing that's
Hmm.
going on right now. Um, but yeah, it's probably the same as you in Groundhog Day. Like it's not like I don't have a ritualized
Hmm.
watching of this movie, but I do watch it rewatch it more often than I rewatch other movies, just because it's just a fun journey for me,
Mm-hmm.
to go along with him, and it's told in such a great cadence that it fits with me, like some of the other great rewatchable movies where you can enter at any point once you know them.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, like the comfort level of it. Um, it's like Shawshank Redemption or anything like that. Like I can start this movie at any point, and I know exactly where I am on the journey, and I can level set myself to, because, and the movie does a good job of that. Of like, I mean, it evokes where we are in the journey through his performance, his interactions, like, what the particular gladiator scene is. Like we know how far along in his transition
Mm-hmm.
of I just want to kill this guy because he killed my family to I'm going to free all these people. I'm going to turn the government over. I'm going to do all the right things. You can just jump in at any point and you just follow the rest of the movie along with it, and you just cheer him on the whole time. Or I, like I said, when I say you, it's sort of the,
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure, sure.
I'm not saying
So
you were,
yeah,
definitely do this, but
I
I follow. I'm a huge fan of his. It is always a joke, like with my sister and I, like just to like whenever anything, for a long time there, like the whole, just like when they all, the first transition of when they go from realizing who he is, and the whole crowd just starts chanting Maximus, Maximus, like without having to, there was just a nuance that me and my sister, whenever we were like going to cheer each other on for something, and it kind of hit that same sort of transition point of I wasn't used to cheering you on, but now I'm a fan of yours. Like we'd be like Maximus, Maximus, and we would just get that secret language of it. And so that's this movie just such a cultural, you know, uh, benchmark for me,
Mhm.
and so there's just a lot of pieces that I'm happy I rewatched it. I'm happy it exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like so what one last bit just on some of that, and then I want to get more into some of the other details that I really do like about
Yep.
this movie. Um, you mentioned how like the balance between he's really in it for revenge, and he is sort of tangentially aware of and making use of the people who want it to be something else, but is kind of disconnected from that himself. It's more like, well, if going along with that, if helping you get what you want helps me get what I want, then fine. I think that there is a part of me that, like, I don't want to blame a movie from 2000 for not, keeping up with some stuff, but like, there's a trend, especially in like video games, in the last 5-10 years or so, where they'll make a game that is just literally drenched in all sorts of like geopolitical imagery, and then try to say, but our game's not political. And like Far Cry 5 is a recent example of that. It's kind of like, let's set this open world shooter in the United States and have all of the bad guys be these weird militia cult figures. But then let's also make sure that we twist everything just enough that nobody can say we're actually doing satire of any actual real people or real things, to the point where it kind of just like it can't stand upright because they've chosen to evoke satire, but then stripped the teeth out of that satire by not making it actually about anything. Right? And I'm not saying Gladiator does that, but that impulse of it's not cool to be political. Right? I think there's a teeny element of that here, is that they think that if Maximus actually did care about restoring the power to the Senate, then that wouldn't be as cool.
Yeah, I guess I read the movie differently, in that that's where he starts.
Mm.
Like he starts like I guess I just see a different end of the journey.
Mm.
I feel like you're absolutely correct. So at the beginning, it is purely I want to do this to get X result, which is revenge.
Mm-hmm.
Then he goes through and realizes that by paying lip service to what everybody else wants helps him get there.
Mm-hmm.
Then he starts to actually befriend and bond with these guys, and now he wants to do it not because of the political moment, but because these guys are now his friends and his brothers, and he would like to continue to carry forward with them and help them to, I now realize this is bigger than just me and my revenge. I am going to get my revenge because my family deserves it. But I have recognized now that I am bigger than all of that. And that's where I feel like why the ending is so powerful to me is because he achieves everything he set out to do. And that's why it's okay that he passes away. And it's not just because he got revenge on his family. He did protect his friends. He did deliver the political message that he was supposed to deliver. Like all those things, like at the end, like he does tell them to do the political thing, but he didn't care. He was dying and he'd already avenged it. And so I can see where you're coming from and how you can read it that way. I read a different transition of, yes, that is where he started, but that is not where he ended.
Well, so let me back up a little bit too, because I don't want to. I don't want to put on this movie something that's actually a complaint about something else that this movie just makes me think of, right? Like it's not so much that this movie does that as much as it makes me think of the things that do, because there's a little bit of like, the prototype version of that sentiment that's in this, even though it's doing other things also. But because of course we also have in the movie that, he really did respect Marcus Aurelius and knew that that's what he wanted. And so the idea of honoring what he wanted is like an important thing too, but we just don't really see him like act on that, really. You know what I mean? Like that's not what drives his behavior. It's really kind of secondary. Which again is like I don't want to criticize this movie so much as I feel like the trend in a lot of popular media, a lot of it has gone in this direction of it's not cool to care about things like politics and government. Like it, it's, and so
and that's where I think that, I maybe would almost make the argument that those things have colored your view of this movie.
Well, I mean, I'm not even going to question that they almost certainly have. I know that I'm a different person watching the movie now than I was when it came out. And that's, like the movie can't do anything about that.
Well, no, because I would say that it does, it definitely does talk about that. It isn't his main driver. His main driver, like just to keep us emotionally connected, is always going to be his family. And that's why he has the little figurines of them, just to keep us connected to like, this is the root thing. But I almost see it as like, can't even think of the best analogy. It's like the opposite of an onion. Like we're adding layers to it. And so he's got this core, which is I'm going to do this, and then he gets the added layer of his friends, and then they become like almost like family to him, and then he realizes the weight remembers what Marcus wanted him to do, and there's conversations he has with those other with the other guys about, well, this was Marcus Aurelius's vision, and this is why I need to do this, and then before even he delivers that at the very end with the more powerful thing, and the fact that the battles escalate in difficulty. What I felt like, to me, that's showing is that he's getting better at fighting these battles as he has more motivations. His base, like when he was just wanting to revenge his family, is when he's fighting in these dirty arenas in the middle of, I think he was in Africa or something like that. Like just doing this, and then as the battles and difficulty increase, the only reason he can keep getting better and good enough to keep fighting in those battles is because his motivation is escalated by what he's trying to accomplish. And it no longer is, yes, the pure one the core is always there, which is why he always touches the figurines. But then he has before every battle, there's a conversation with the other guys there and it goes from, yeah, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to team up even though we don't know each other.
Mm-hmm.
To, hey, here's how we're going to do this now that we are friends with each other. Here's how we're going to do this now that we're brothers. Here's why I'm going to do this for more than just myself and also for what Marcus wanted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he has that conversation. It's not left out.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. I think that like ultimately, this again, I'll recognize that this is less about what the movie is and more about other things, maybe things that have been at least somewhat influenced by this, but just this element where it really dabbles in the idea of what this government of Rome should be, should look like, right? It kind of gives some lip service to that, but we don't really get much sense of what would actually be different under the Senate.
Yeah.
Like, what
Okay.
difference does that
100%
make
I'll
to
give you
anyone?
that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
will give you that 100%. The movie does not say whether what he's trying to accomplish is right or wrong,
Mm-hmm.
other than it's what he believes is the right thing, and then what Marcus was believed was the right thing. And so yes, 100, that part 100%. It's not taking a stand other than saying this is what these guys believe is what's right
Mm-hmm.
and what they're willing to fight for and why they're willing to fight for it. Not this is purely the good version, and this is,
Yeah.
there's not another good version that could come. Yeah, I that agree. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like the only real like touching on that they give is the idea that all of these games are being paid for by money that would have otherwise been needed to reinforce food supplies and that sort of thing, and that like people might
Yeah.
eventually be running out of food because we're spending so much money on this stuff, right? But
Yes,
like,
it clearly takes a stance that the current situation is bad. It's not necessarily taking a stance that this is the panacea that is going to
mm-hmm,
solve. It's just this is bad. We need something different. This is what these two guys believe is different, and so they're fighting for it.
yeah,
It sort of separates it that way.
mm-hmm,
But to your point, yes, it definitely creates the current situation equals bad.
yeah, yeah. So I think that there is an element to which, um, and again, it's like this is like it's not fair to blame a movie for not doing something it wasn't really trying to do. It wasn't trying to be a complex historical drama about the ins and outs of how Roman government worked, right? That's not what it's going for. All of that stuff's really just texture, right? In this story that's really about Maximus and this desire he has for revenge against Commodus and some of the other secondary characters who get caught up along the way, right? So that is what the movie is. The rest of it is like, you know, I don't want to say window dressing exactly. That's overstates the point, but secondary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things to change gears now to things that I just unambiguously really like about it is the thing that leapt out at me starting it up was the score. Like, not that I didn't know that the score was amazing. I mean, like, I tend to use instrumental music, which often includes both video game and movie soundtracks, as like I put that on when I'm writing or working on something like that. That where the like music with lyrics would distract me. But like the Gladiator score is one that's been on rotation for years. Like I have listened to that soundtrack probably 100 times more than I've seen the movie.
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I know that music in and out, and yet somehow still, when it starts spinning up that pre-battle music, that dun, 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 that sort of thing coming into the battle is like it's just exhilarating. The score for this movie is really incredible. Hans Zimmer won the Oscar for it, although one of the bits of trivia from IMDb is that there was actually a co-composer that didn't get listed on the Oscar just because of some weird rules about the Academy, like who could have their name on the score. And so there's actually, shoot, where was this? Um,
It's fully dark here now, so I gotta shut the blinds all the way.
okay. um, gosh, where was this? I can't find it now, but I guess there was a co-composer for the score. But the score is incredible, which is the actual point that I think is it's fantastic in the sense that it's so evocative and really, we talk sometimes about scores and whether they are, make themselves known or disappear. And this is certainly music that's it's very music forward. You're supposed to notice the music, right?
Right.
And but it's very effective in that regard. It just provides this sort of driving pulse to power all of these action sequences.
Well,
And
and even more than that, I mean, there's the dream sequence, um, where he continues dreaming about going and visiting his family, to then when he finally dies, and sort of just the way that it vote like it just gives us extra layer of like, we believe that he is with them in whatever afterlife you want to believe in, like, because of the way the music and the start of it, like there again, it sequences a couple of things, like there's a score, there's the touching of the wheat from his field that they burned, and seeing his family, and then finally at the end, you hear the score, he touches the wheat, and then he gets to embrace his family.
yeah.
And it's like it's such a powerful mechanism that is made even better by the score,
Oh,
and that's
absolutely.
outside of the battle sequences.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't mean it's only good in the battles, but
No,
yeah,
no, I was adding on to what you were
yeah,
saying, not combating what you were
yeah.
saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
you are absolutely correct. I think that the score is incredible, and frankly, it's like not to dismiss the rest of the movie, but it's just like I said, it's like I came away from this movie with the score more than anything else, and that I think is just it's incredible. Um, we can also talk about like we have our leads obviously where we have Russell Crowe is doing a very Russell Crowe role in this. Like, not to say that he doesn't have significant range, because we get to see him have moments of humor, and of course the moments where he's literally got like snot coming out of his nose because he's crying so hard at his family. Which, the way I said it just now makes it sound dismissive, which is actually the opposite of what I'm trying to say, which is to say he demonstrates that whole range. Russell Crowe is a good actor. I'm not saying he's not, but this role is kind of like just is right down the middle pitch for him,
Yeah.
right? This is like if this is a Russell Crowe role. It is designed for his strengths as an actor.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
This is one I didn't read the trivia, but I cannot imagine. It would be a different movie with anybody else, honestly.
oh
Like,
yeah.
not that it would be bad, it would just
Hmm.
be different. Yeah, he's just very good at it. So,
And then we also have Joaquin Phoenix as Commodus, who I think this was the first movie that I really noticed him in. I mean, he had been in lots of stuff before this. Of course, he was like Leaf Phoenix as a child actor for a while and all of that sort of thing. But this, his role in this, like Commodus, is such like he's a good example of a villain character that is made so much more human and complex than a lesser movie would have needed him to be, right? Like he's not like good, and I don't want to say like sympathetic even, but you can see an actual person in there, right? And not just a caricature of these tyrannical sort of,
yes.
positions.
The reason I'm smiling is that this was a thing I was going to bring up eventually.
Okay.
To your point of how this reminds you of other genres and things that have done that, because we're watching it from this time period back,
Mm-hmm.
like this performance reminded me, it almost looked like training wheels for the Joker character,
Yeah. Yeah. Um.
of humanizing somebody who's bad and evil,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and,
Yeah.
and because that's what he does here, you know.
I would invite anyone listening to this who's curious about what we think about Joker to go and listen to our Oscar marathon episode where we talk about Joker, because frankly I don't want to get into it that much more here.
Yeah,
But
so listen to that.
but no, you're right though.
We always agreed that his performance was never the fault of
Oh, of
Joker.
course, no,
Yeah,
definitely not. His performance is the best thing about that movie.
yeah,
But yeah, so the but yeah, in this movie though, we see like at the same time that we can absolutely recognize like how dangerous to everyone else we care about he is, and how in many respects he's bad for Rome in a lot of ways. We can nonetheless still see the parts of him that like that this craving for love and respect that he feels like he does not deserve, because like he's not a narcissist who thinks, well, obviously everyone would love me, and if they're not demonstrating it enough, that's because it's their fault. Instead, what we see from him is this constant inferiority complex of how he feels like he should be the person everybody loves and respects, like Maximus, but he knows he's not, and that terrifies him. And he is constantly overcompensating as a result. And I feel like we see all of that in his performance, and I think that's really good. And then, we have Connie Nielsen as Lucilla, which I don't want to be like dismissive. I think she does a great job in a role that is really like, there are a couple of scenes where she gets to be a little more interesting, but mostly it is a role that's designed to prop up the other two performances. You know what I mean? I don't mean like prop up like she's designed to be to stand there while the Maximus and Commodus act at her. You know what I mean? In a lot of
yeah.
the movie.
Yes, and that's one of the other things that I had in sort of my list is that that could be, I guess, seen as one of the faults of the movie. As you're looking for.
I yeah, there's she's like the only female character in the movie.
The only
Like,
female character in the
yeah.
movie. There's. I mean, there is a. I guess the person of color, is pretty strong as kind of his
Yeah, no,
becomes
I
number
really
two.
like him. Yeah, Juman
Yeah.
Hunsu as Juba. Is that? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it kind of becomes like his like number two
Yeah.
in the Gladiator circuit. So that was good.
Yeah.
But I mean that's the lens we look at films now, and
Yeah. It's not a very diverse cast. You know.
no.
Yeah.
That being said, it would. This is part of the argument for more diversity in movies, is so that when you have sometimes if you have a movie like this, where you really are pitting two characters against each other who happen to be white males, like that's the story, and you do have a collection of other people who do a good job. If all movies weren't like that, like then this movie would be fine in that context, because the movie doesn't, it's not putting male characters in front of female characters for any kind of like misogynistic reason. Like the movie's just not
right.
about. It's just not what the movie's about.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also true that because this is a fictionalized version of real events anyway, like they could have written it any way they wanted. So, but which I'm not criticizing the movie for not writing it differently. I wasn't even really going to say that was a fault, but like I don't disagree with what you're saying either. But just I think
the thing that we should look at movies via that context,
yeah, no,
and
I agree.
and not necessarily, and that's my point. Is this isn't a movie that should be, whatever, quote unquote, canceled
Right.
because
Yeah. No.
of female representation. Like the movie just doesn't. That's not the story it's telling. And maybe yes, it could have told that story, but that's
Yeah.
anyway.
So like I like that. I like the whole element of giving her some complexity, though, just in the sense that like she really does care for Maximus, but she's also got her son, who's essentially a hostage,
Right.
And so I think that the movie really dramatizes well that conflict that she's got, where on the one hand, we want her to, and she wants to support Maximus, but we can also understand why, if she gets put in a hard position, we can see why she would choose the way she did, right? Like
Mhm.
we don't hate her for what she does in here.
No,
Like,
that's due to her performance, to your
yeah,
point. Yeah.
right. Yeah, so I that's some good stuff there. And then of course you mentioned, of course, we have Jumun Hunsu as this other gladiator with Maximus, and he's really great too, because he becomes this, like, confidant for Maximus, and he's the one that we can hear the story, and he's the one where we get this repeated refrain that is another standout bit for me, which is just like, one day we will see them again, but not yet, not yet. That whole thing. Which, oddly enough, it was like, before rewatching the movie, I would have said, oh yeah, that was just really stood out to me as one of the most meaningful, like dialogue exchanges. But almost to the point where, like, when I really rewatched it, it was like, oh, it was almost felt too on the nose. I think some of the dialogue in this movie is a little contrived. And I don't mean to say this in an overly critical way, because it's a very challenging thing, because when you're writing a movie that is, like, meant to take place in ancient Rome, but you've got you know uh, people speaking in English, there's always just this question of, like, okay, well, like, it's the whole cliche about, like, why do Romans speak in British accents, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of, like, well, how did these people actually talk? And so, whether there's a little bit of a contrived, heightened element of how people talk is, it's fine. It's like, it's, I, yeah, it's fine. Which I think actually dovetails nicely into the other thing that I was going to say that about, which is that I think this movie was notable at the time for some of its, early CGI effects, where they made the stadium and all of the people and
Uh,
everything. And
uh, just hit my last 2 points right there.
oh,
So
okay, well, go, you can
no, I mean, I'm
continue.
not saying it in a bad way. It's
Oh,
actually
okay.
funny because we noticed that I meant that in a good
Mm,
thing. Like I didn't mean that
yeah.
dismissively. Like
Uh,
that's
like,
because it is, those are the last two pieces for me. Is like that secondary character, and to the points I was making earlier. He to you reference him as like his sounding board or whatever.
mm-hmm.
Like
Confidant is what I
he,
said,
yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
he is the guy that kind of, for me, helps us guide Maximus's transition. Like he's the one that befriends him,
Mm-hmm.
and their friendship is sort of like the milestone marker of how Maximus is progressing in like this idea that I've talked about of him building these layers of what he's fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's fighting for him first as a friend, and then they become, like, again, like brothers, like bonded.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he starts fighting not just for him but for all of the guys that they're down there, because he convinces him. Like Maximus doesn't go through this journey on his own. He has, while he is Maximus's sounding board,
Mm-hmm.
he does reflect back wisdom to Maximus that helps him develop.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's part of what makes his character really, really good,
Mm-hmm.
is that it very subtly like shifts what Maximus is doing
Mm-hmm.
through not trying to manipulate him, by just being who he is and his purity to his cause.
Mm-hmm.
And that part's great. And then, yeah, the last part of I was going to say was the same thing as you. Like the special effects are, for that time frame. I mean, or were you going to say something different?
I was gonna say, I did like they didn't bother me, but I feel like it was like, it really rides that line between, if you didn't do it that way, there would be no other way to do it. And so you kind of have to, and it allowed for certain things to be shot in a way that would have been impossible without them, but also don't really stand up to close scrutiny. And so it becomes just it's a little bit of a line between like, I tend to roll my eyes when people get too uptight about like, oh, you can totally tell it's CGI, because in some cases it's like, well, yeah, obviously, because they don't actually have giant monsters, or like they're not really flooding the city with a giant tidal wave, like, yes, it's CGI. But I don't know, I think some of it, like, I don't generally notice some of that, but I feel like, it's one thing to say for the time, but it's another thing to say that there are movies made, that have the, like, just as a comparison, for example, when we talk about 2001, right? Like, that was made, in the 60s, but the effects of it are used in a way that makes it almost like mostly it totally holds up as looking good now, whereas there are other movies where we kind of say, well, for the time, right?
Yeah. So we have a lot of points of agreement, actually.
Okay.
Because I think your central point in that there's this line that it kind of is on.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. Where my for the time concept came in is that I think it did more complex things, and that's where I disagree with you a little bit about maybe the 2001 thing. Like,
Okay.
2001 didn't have to have humans fighting tigers, like.
Right.
There is a complexity to what they did that was a little bit farther along.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not what I was talking about in terms of CGI.
I
'Cause
know,
that,
but
okay.
I'm talking about holistically all the
Okay.
CGI, and that is a particular. If you're talking about a line, there are what I think of as there are things that maybe are on this side of the line that maybe they didn't do so well, and there are things on this side of the line that they did pretty well.
Okay. Yeah.
And fighting tigers in an arena is pretty good,
Well, that was
and
all
that's why I said
practical though.
all the
They had
time.
real tigers there, though.
There's a lot of CGI to it, though. You,
Maybe. Because I mean, there's all sorts of trivia about how they had 15 real tigers and the Wrangler and all of that about.
Yeah, and yes, they are real. The tigers themselves are not CGI. That's the
Mhm.
clever part. The how the scenes are laid together is the CGI. The
Okay.
tigers aren't that close to everybody.
I wasn't even talking about any of that, and I off the top of my head, I can't, I don't recall. What I was talking about is the effects they used to like fill out the gigantic Coliseum and make it look like it was huge and full of people.
Yes, and I'm talking about all of them together. I'm
Okay.
not. I'm not. So I agree with your particular one, but I'm talking about the positive ones first.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not discounting yours.
Mm-hmm.
I just hadn't gotten there yet. I was
All
talking
right.
about the ones that I thought were really good, which was that blending of taking like, again, it's a tiger battle between humans. They did not actually fight the tigers. Like, no matter how many
Well,
tigers were
yeah.
really used, they didn't fight the tigers. Like, there was a CGI there that layered that all together that was super clever that I totally respect. And then, going to your point, yes, they built a stadium that looks like a fucking Madden game.
Yeah.
Like, I get it.
Well, so that's definitely what I was talking about. I just looked it up. There are no CGI tigers in Gladiator.
Correct.
They
I
do
never
use.
said the tigers were CGI. It's
Okay.
CGI that puts the real
Well,
tiger
it's
with the
green
real
screen.
human.
It's well,
I
I
just
don't.
or just editing. You want to call it editing?
Okay.
It's
Well, all
by
right.
a
Yes.
computer,
Yeah. If you want to say special effects, sure. Yes.
which is what I originally said was the
Okay.
special.
Well,
But
but I mentioned CGI, and then you were
fair
talking
enough. Fair
about
enough.
CGI.
Yeah,
Okay.
I took a leap of and took it to all special effects.
Yeah.
That's
All right. We're
fair.
good.
I did
So.
not. Yeah, no. I recognize the tigers are not CGI.
Yeah. So that's all that tripped me up, because I will 100% agree that the tiger fight is very effective, and certainly they did use special effects to make it look more like they were interacting more than they really were. And so I will absolutely agree. I think that part is great.
Right. And that's to my point to your of the line that they're walking is that you have such a phenomenal special effect on this side.
Hmm.
And then you use this sort of video game effect over here that is, and that's why I said that one is not for the time. That one is just that was awkward and
Yeah.
still looks awkward.
Well, like,
Awkward in 2000.
yeah.
It looked like Madden, you
Hmm.
know.
Well, that was one thing I was going to say is that I did look up Roger Ebert's review, and among other things, that was one of the things that he really dinged the movie for, was to just say, like, it was distracting. I would have rather they found some other way to do it. It looked bad, and I feel like I don't dislike it that much, but it doesn't look good. You know, certainly
Yeah.
if you pay, to the extent that you pay any attention to that, it is very obviously early CGI in a way that like it depends on your tolerance for that, because like if you play a lot of video games, you're used to seeing that sort of CGI and it doesn't necessarily matter, but it doesn't really look
So
like it's
that's
real.
my postulation on that, is that's what they were banking on, is the fact that that had been so prevalent in video games up to that point that people wouldn't mind. Like, this is just a guess that they didn't look at it and say, yeah, that looks like real people. They said, you know what? People have been playing these games for 10 years with fake crowds. Like, this is better than most of those games, so maybe we're good. That I don't feel like they just signed off and were like, yeah, it looks like shit, but we're just going to do it anyway.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think it was that, but I think that there might be an element to their reach exceeded their grasp. You know what I mean? It's not like, it's like you can only go so, like when you've made the movie and you've shot everything with the understanding that you're going to have CGI there, just because the CGI doesn't look as good as you would like it to look doesn't mean that you just decide that to not have it, because you've built a whole bunch of your shots around the expectation of it being there. So I don't think that they said, "Oh, it will be okay because people like video games." I think probably they wanted it to look better, and that's just as good as they could get it.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're right. No.
I mean, that would be my guess. But that's just on the basis of it's possible that people kind of tried to make peace with it on that basis, but I feel like if they could have made it look better, they would have.
Yeah, no, and I'm definitely not saying they had the ability to make it better.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
But the argument is, if they were not capable of making it look better than that, then they should have done something else.
right, and that's where we're kind of diverging. Is like,
Yeah.
I'm saying, well, maybe they recognized they weren't capable of making it look better, but didn't worry about it because they thought it would pass. And
Hmm.
you're saying maybe they thought they could have made it look better, built the whole movie, and then were backed into a corner. And we don't know which way it was. I think
Well,
those are two
yeah.
fair.
I mean, we know that like the effects like come in after everything, right? But I mean, I think that there was definitely an element. There was a period in that like in making movies when you had a few movies with really jaw-dropping use of CGI. There's like Terminator 2 is one of the big ones that people talk about, right? Because with the T-1000 doing all the morphing and everything, but because on the one hand, like when he's all chromey and everything like that, it's easy to do a CGI effect of that, right? And then it looks mostly okay when it morphs into like an actual actor or something like that. I think, but a lot of those are like not CGI anymore, right? Like that's where they have the actress with the with the prosthetic on her hand to make it look like a spike. But there was this increasing use of CGI and this idea of like, well, can this start being a thing where we can have actually a shot from the outside of this complete coliseum that looks like it was new and functioning instead of the ruin that it is today? Wouldn't that be cool if we could actually show that without just building a miniature, which would also look fake in its own way, right? So this idea of, well, can we use this new modern technology to do that? And I think that that was the ambition, but I think the result was maybe not all they hoped for.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I don't know.
ultimately, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
It is definitely a thing worth discussing and mentioning about the movie. But it's,
Yeah.
yeah, ultimately, I'm not. I don't. It doesn't bother me that much.
No, I just mostly I like more than it bothers me. I just remember people talking about it at the time. and so but I think that there's a lot to like about this, but let's talk about this, unless you have something else that you wanted to touch on
Nope,
specifically.
covered it.
So let's talk then about sort of the context in which you sort of mentioned this movie of like Groundhog Day. I'm not sure there's another movie on the list that really is a close match for it necessarily. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I mean, I've been thinking about that since that's how I thought about my movie,
Mm-hmm.
and looked at the other comedies, but it,
I mean, if there was going to be any movie that was a close like I feel like the closest might be Sullivan's Travels. Like, but even that's a stretch.
yeah, I was just trying to think of comedies that were more clever and had more depth than maybe they should have.
Mm-hmm. Like The
Um,
Apartment.
yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but specifically with Gladiator, like it invites immediate comparisons to things like Spartacus and Ben Hur, for example, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I so I again, this is our list. Like I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it more than Spartacus.
Mm-hmm.
I I recognize that there are probably elements to Spartacus that make it very impactful for some people that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that don't dial in for me.
Mm-hmm.
That may be part of why it's on this list that just aren't always talked about.
Yeah.
Like sort of the kind of first intro into sort of kind of introducing a little bit of not I mean there's not any gay characters, but there's sort of like an overtone with some of
Mm-hmm.
them that kind of like
Yeah.
open that up. And so I don't want to be dismissive of that. That being said, like that's never been a part of Spartacus for me, other than recognizing like that, and this is my list. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like this movie is more entertaining and well put together to tell a story about the things that were happening
Mm-hmm.
in that time period that I do I nominated it for that position and I do endorse it after having rewatched it. So
Sure. Sure. Like when I think about it in comparison to Spartacus, like one of the one of the things that comes to mind is like points to compare the two are we were just talking about the use of CGI to kind of recreate this Colosseum feel, and like although there were some impressive sets and so on in Spartacus, like there are some things that they're just really not like because they didn't have even the limited CGI that they had for Gladiator, like they just couldn't show some things like that. They would just have to build the story around not showing shots of the whole big, Coliseum, right? Like the fight sequences are much smaller scale as a result, right? And even though you have some sequences where there are large numbers of extras, like it's not, it's not on the scale of battle size in the same way. And then, of course, if you go all the way to Ben Hur, that one had those incredible like physical sets and huge numbers of extras. But of course, like that's a whole other school of filmmaking at that point. Like they just
yeah,
don't
it's
do that
that's
anymore.
even though it's a similar time period, that's a different movie to me because
Mm-hmm.
there's the scope of it and also the element of like the fact that there's a layer of like
Mm-hmm.
the Bible and the Christianity story that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
woven through Ben Hur
Yeah.
that gives it like a different
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like we're telling this as like a tangential like almost like this is if you read the Bible, here is now a supplemental story, like almost like a universe story.
Yeah.
Like to not to be glib,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of what it's like.
Sure, sure, yeah. So yeah, I would agree that I think Spartacus is like the closer comparison. Um, I feel like Spartacus it's got sort of the historical weight to it. You know what I mean? It's like it's stood the test of time, that sort of element. So it's just been around longer. Um, I think I'm not sure. I feel like there's anything in Gladiator that is quite as powerful as the I am Spartacus bit, but that's kind of a standout moment for the movie. The rest of it isn't like at that level, I don't think. Um, I think if we didn't have other better Kubrick movies on the list, I would worry more about that piece of it. But yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think overall, Gladiator is a more fun movie to watch than Spartacus for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, and to the fight scenes. I mean, like, I know we sort of entered the fight scene because of the sort of the CGI versus special effect
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
But the fact is, there's a fight scene where they fight with tigers. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like that's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
Spartacus didn't have that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It,
Yeah.
you know, it's not I am Spartacus moment,
Mm-hmm.
but it's pretty damn impressive in the lexicon of scenes that exist in movies. You know, I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, like that makes sense to me. So let's talk about this. So like, raising it in specific context with, say, Spartacus. Like,
Yeah, so we need to kind of wrap
yeah,
down
no,
because
we're
dinner is
getting there.
about to be
Yeah,
served.
yeah,
So
we're good. So that's what I was trying to bring us to is like where we're going to
I
put them on
figured.
the
Yeah.
list. Yeah, yeah. So the question could be, do we want to put movies head to head and make them like replace their counterpart on the list, or do we just want to take our new movies and just put them wherever we want to put them on the list? What do you think?
This is super complicated. I because I hadn't thought through this part.
I mean, it's probably simplest to just say where on our existing list would we put them. Because
Yeah.
then, if we want to talk direct swaps, then we would have to say like, well, I have Spartacus at 71, and even if I agree to switch it with Gladiator, does that mean Gladiator is now at 71? Like that's a different question. So I feel it might be simplest to just say where do we want to put them on the list.
All right. I mean, I may still direct swap it, but let me see here. Let me look
Okay.
at the list.
I'm also just looking at the list, and
I don't
somehow I
even know
have
where
one
I
more
have
movie
to
than you do.
find this thing.
Do you not have the
Oh, I'd already dropped Spartacus off the list, so it doesn't matter. I can put it wherever I want.
Oh, that's why. Yeah, yeah. I was gonna. Yeah, you had taken it off the list altogether. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Uh, where are you thinking?
Man, this is a tough one. I think I'm going to put it at 74.
Okay.
You're almost right there. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
no, above Pulp Fiction. Yeah.
above Pulp Fiction. All right.
Yeah. I feel like that those are movies from around the same time period. I'm willing to, yeah, I'm happy to knock that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a little more to it than that.
Started to type in Spartacus. So
Oh,
Gladiator. Um, and I think I'm gonna put Gladiator uh, just a little bit lower than that, but not too far. I actually was gonna put it like I kept almost putting it just right before Ben Hur. You know what? I think I'm gonna put it actually just right after Ben Hur because although I feel like it's a more fun movie, there is just the historical kind of context of Ben Hur, which is different. So it's measuring on different metrics there, but so that puts it at 82. Okay, if I could spell it right.
okay.
All right. So for me, I'm gonna have Groundhog Day relatively high. Excuse me, higher. I'm gonna put it. Hmm. I'm gonna put it in between Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Singing in the Rain in the mid 20s. because it's a movie that I think about and touch on and apply it to my life in a number of ways, and it's one of my favorites.
That works. I'm gonna put it at 80,
Okay.
because that puts it as right behind the first comedy I ran into, which is Duck Soup.
Okay.
I feel like Duck Soup is just a little bit better, so I'm going to put it right behind that, though.
All right.
But I do, if I don't leave now, my dinner will get cold.
Okay. So,
Wrap up. Sorry.
yes, no, that's fine. But our last decision is what movies do we pick for next time? And I'm going to propose, based on it being Halloween month, let's each pick a horror movie. I mean, I know you like Halloween, so that would certainly be a good.
I really like Halloween, but it's not going to make it on the list. I mean, yeah, let's watch Halloween, though, for fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then like this was my idea, but now I have to pick one. Night of the Living Dead.
Ooh, good one.
Yeah, original Romero one. Yeah, so we'll watch those two, and who knows if they end up, where they go on this list. But I feel like they're going to be fun to talk about.
It will be fun to watch.
Yeah. All right. So we'll leave it there. So thanks everyone for listening and or watching. Watch good movies.
Good night, everybody.